south, east, and west, all the workers oppressed, join the union ranks today.
On the morning of May 23rd, 1950, 1,100 members of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union assembled on the Atlantic City Boardwalk. They were the delegates to the union's Golden Jubilee Convention. Shortly after 10 o'clock, with their officers in the forefront, they began their march to the huge convention hall. Colorful banners identified the delegates from more than 400 communities in the United States and Canada. President David Dubinsky, with his wife and daughter, headed the long procession moving toward Convention Hall. Behind them marched the shop leaders of the great women's apparel industry, headed by the members of the union's General Executive Board. All had been selected as delegates by their co-workers because of devotion to the ILGWU. At the entrance to Convention Hall, the band stood aside as the delegates passed in review. For some, this was a first convention. Veterans of the ILGWU remembered other historic gatherings of their union. Singing their songs, they dipped their banners and entered the hall to begin the historic conclave. In the huge hall, the delegates saw the convention emblem. Each delegation proceeded to its appointed place in the hall. Excitement and anticipation reached a peak. Before getting down to business, the delegates heard a concert in which the New York City Symphony was conducted by Laszlo Halish. They listened to three world-famous soloists who had come especially to participate in the opening of the Garment Workers' Congress. Igor Gorin, singing star of radio in the concert hall, thrilled the assembly with his moving renditions of operatic selections and folk songs. Then Risa Stevens of the Metropolitan Opera, in a stunning gown, stepped into the spotlight. Her singings brought shouts of bravo from the entire audience. Alec Templeton, world-famous blind pianist, demonstrated his mastery of the keyboard with a stirring performance of the Rhapsody in Blue. The enthusiasm of the delegates was evident in the warmth of their applause. They treasured the music, remembering the fines and the firing for those in the sweatshops who dared to sing at their work. Then, to the rousing applause of the guests of honor and the delegates, President Dubinsky began his important keynote address. After recalling the path along which the union had moved and tracing its many pioneer efforts, he welcomed the 1,100 delegates and called on them to be careful in their important deliberations. He turned to pay homage to the handful of remaining old-timers in seats of honor at the convention, who had joined the union the year it was founded. Then, in closing, he said, "Let us rededicate ourselves to make our union more effective as an instrument for the welfare of our country, our own workers, and for the worldwide cause of democracy which is being sorely challenged today." Many invited guests addressed the convention. In the 10 days of their sessions, the delegates heard outstanding leaders in government, labor, community, and religious fields. Among the first to appear was Secretary of Labor Tobin. He declared that the garment workers' contribution to the fight to preserve freedom in the world was worth 100 divisions. President Dubinsky thanked him for conveying the greetings of President Truman, who said, "I send you good wishes for another half-century of progress devoted not alone to improving the welfare of your members, but of service to the community in which they live." Floor demonstrations invoked the rich heritage of the garment workers. New York garment workers showed their pride in their union. The first to establish a health center, the first to win the 40-hour week, then the 35-hour week, paid vacations, retirement benefits. Italian cloak makers symbolized a half-century of garment workers' progress with a huge cake. Old-timers who had participated in the battles for these benefits joined with younger members in the celebration. On stage, the union's many welfare benefits were dramatized. The audience gave the Italian cloak makers, led by Vice President Mozzani, an enthusiastic reception. Later, First Vice President Antonini presented the Italian dressmaker's mural depicting the overthrow of the French Bastille, symbol of oppression. After regular sessions, the convention's committee met. More than 300 resolutions were considered by 13 committees. Later, each committee presented its recommendations to the convention. These, approved or rejected by the full assembly, spelled out the Union's program for the next 3 years. Highlight of the Jubilee celebration was With These Hands, a motion picture especially produced for the 50th anniversary of the ILGWU. President Dubinsky introduced to the convention the author of the film and its 2 outstanding stars. Morton Wishengrad, one of America's outstanding writers for radio, and known to many of the delegates as a former educational director for the Union, received the plaudits of the Assembly. He reminded the delegates of his own experiences as an officer of the ILGWU, experiences on which he had drawn in writing his heartfelt script. Next to come forward was Sam Levine, the Alexander Brody of With These Hands. Levine, once a garment cutter, later a shining star of Broadway and Hollywood, brought many laughs as he compared the advantages of film acting and garment cutting, in favor of the latter. The slow-spoken shyness that endeared Joseph Wiseman in his portrayal of Mike DeLeo was evident as he rose to receive the thanks of the delegates. For a moment, the new experience of speaking without a script made him hesitate. Then, encouraged by Dubinsky, he told of his own childhood and a father who was a member of the Garment Cutters Local. The president welcomed Labor England's Dame Ann Laughlin. The convention cheered the report of New York's dressmakers, who presented a huge mural to the ILGWU. The painting depicted the many phases of union activity. It pictured the highlights of the heroic history of the dressmakers. Vice President Julius Hockman declared that the painting would be installed in the general office. Then he introduced Ernest Feeney, who designed and painted the large, colorful panel. Between sessions, delegates visited educational exhibits. They were fascinated by the show of historic garment-making equipment gathered by the Union's research department, tracing the development of sewing, pressing, and cutting machines, and bridging the span from the foot treadle to the modern high-speed sewer. Evenings, delegates studied reports and resolutions, finished their committee assignments. Committee chairmen reported to the full convention, opening debate on the resolutions and recommendations presented to the delegates. Here, on platform and convention floor, the most important business of the gathering was carried forward. Every shade of opinion was represented in the contest of pros and cons. Then, on each resolution, the vote was taken. Thus, Union policy for the next term was hammered out. Other reports, such as that by Adolf Held, paid tribute to the Union's aid activities, spurred by officers and staff members like Hannah Haskell. The first of the regional reports told of ILGWU progress in the Union's frontier areas in Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia. Upper South manager Bambase described drives to win better work and wage conditions in the section of the country where the American idea of union was born. In its report presented by Vice President Wanda, the Eastern Out-of-Town Department memorialized a half-century of achievement with a beautiful bronze plaque. Climax of the convention's first week was the visit of Vice President Alban W. Barkley. As the reception committee guided him toward the stage, delegates rose in their seats to cheer the political veteran and his wife. They remembered how he carried aloft the banner of a fair deal, put the full benefit of his experience into his barnstorming swing around the country in the 1948 presidential campaign. On stage, members of the General Executive Board gathered around the guests of honor. While delegates shouted their cheers of welcome, the ILGWU chief greeted Mr. and Mrs. Barkley. The convention, charmed by the couple, took them to its heart. The vice president prepared to deliver the address that became the major policy statement of the convention.
To mankind, the human race has not been willing to have its soul and its mind and its body in chains and shackles very long at a time. We have not been able to repeal.
In the press room, reporters listened to the vice president's credo for America.
But we are committed to its repeal.
Editor Max Danish
And
put it into the
just as
record.
eternal vigilance
Copies
is
were sped
required
to
of
news
liberty
wire services.
in the economic or political
The address
field,
was
it is
carried by the
required
Columbia
for liberty in the
Broadcasting
field of
System
labor
and the ILGWU's radio station, WFDR. During the ovation that followed his address, Vice President Barclay received a special badge, making him an honorary delegate to the convention. Following Vice President Barclay's stirring address, the Union's Southwest District presented its dramatic report. Delegates from 14 states, dressed in the colorful, historic costumes of the Mississippi Valley, filled the large stage. Each regional group sang a song drawn from the rich folklore heritage of the area. The various state groups were identified by Vice President Pearlstein. The convention hall echoed with songs of riverboat races, Daniel Boone, and the days of the covered wagon. Young women who only a few days before were still at their sewing machines stirred the delegates with their ballet presentation of the ageless theme, The Triumph of Righteousness Over Evil. Many evenings of rehearsal, plus genuine devotion to the educational ideals of the ILGWU, were reflected in the fine performance. The artistic presentation moved the audience, which applauded its message of freedom and brotherhood. The entire delegation received warm praise from the President. Reporters representing the major newspapers and wire services of the country heard President Dubinsky analyze the ILGWU's detailed financial report at a special press conference in his hotel headquarters. The entire financial structure was carefully pictured by the head of the ILGWU, who was also the union's secretary-treasurer. In Convention Hall the next day, former Attorney General Francis Biddle brought greetings from Americans for Democratic Action. He warned the delegates, we must refuse to be stampeded into the kind of repressive society against which we are all marshaling all our resources. Beardsley Rummel, noted economist, reported on the Israeli housing bond drive. Oscar Ewing, Federal Security Administrator, defined current political issues. From overseas came spokesmen from nations that had received aid and encouragement from the ILGWU. From the world's newest democracy came Israel's ambassador, Eliyahu Eilath, telling of the work being done by the Histadrut, the labor movement of his country. He told the delegates that their support had brought the young nation through its most trying times. Ambassador Alberto Tacchiani brought greetings from a new Italy. Out of war-torn Europe came 5 other ambassadors brought across the Atlantic, especially for the convention by the Cloak Out-of-Town Department. The delegates filled the stage to greet these visitors, 5 children who in the years following the war had been adopted by the department, headed by Vice President Rubin, their faces filled with wonder and excitement. As Rainer Dubinsky extended a child's welcome in behalf of the children of America, Carla Lipsig joined in presenting toy gifts to help make their American visit more memorable. Each child speaks to the delegates in its native tongue, simple, heartbreaking words of thanks from the children of Europe, as Mama Bertha Mehring watches. A child speaks in Italian. Little Ambassador Loredana Guarneri tells what ILG aid has meant. Girolamo Gulicki of the Roosevelt Training School says the words of gratitude, remembers a father who fought in the Italian underground, remembers him captured and killed, and even a convention full of love can't heal the wound or silence the choking sobs. These 2 were guests of honor. They received delegates' badges and flowers. And in the pride and excitement of the moment, the tears dried. It was a great moment for them and the convention. The children took pride in their delegates' badges. And the president of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union donned a child's sailor hat, played piggyback, smiled through his own tears to bring back the smile on the face of a child who remembered his father murdered. The steady pace of convention sessions was broken by a gala jamboree, refreshments and dancing plus a big stage show that featured Eddie Cantor. A variety of top-notch acts helped the delegates relax after the long day's work. They laughed at the graceful comic antics of dancers Mata and Harry and marveled at the fast, clever patter of pitchman Sid Stone. The evening ended as it began, with dancing and refreshments. Two leading liberals of the United States Senate spoke to the convention. Hubert H. Humphrey of Minnesota first addressed the Garment Workers' Assembly in 1944. Boasting of his honorary membership in the ILGWU, he declared, "I am proud to know that the ILGWU has helped to hold high the hand of democracy and freedom in the countries of Europe." The young senator from Minnesota received the convention badge and best wishes from President David Dubinsky. Senator Herbert H. Lehman received an ovation as President Dubinsky introduced him. In the audience were many old-timers who remembered Lehman as the aide to Governor Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the time of the 1929 cloakmakers' strike. In the Senator, the delegates recognized a champion of their cause, first as a governor, later as a legislator. The delegates cheered as President Dubinsky, in presenting the convention badge, called Senator Lehman a great humanitarian who understands the needs of the people. Vice President Gingold started the novel report of the Northeast Department by opening a huge book. The story began...
My name is Mary Strong.
The sweatshop.
Machine, don't you know my back is breaking? If you won't hurry, I'll get fined. Little machine, tomorrow will be payday, and all the piece rates are so low. What shall I tell the butcher and the baker? Little machine, I do not know.
The strike.
Hills and from the valley, sweatshop thunder their finale. See the garment workers rally. This is the strike.
Collective bargaining.
Don't be mad, I did not hurt you. Don't be sad, and I don't think that I'm so bad. Okay, I'll pay you more, just 1 more cent.
Not enough.
I'll make it 2.
Not enough.
I'll give you 3.
Not enough.
I'll give you 4.
Not enough.
I'll make it 5.
Not enough.
6, 10, no more.
Not enough.
All right then, 7.
Not enough.
What do you want?
Oh, Mr. Boss, you're not so bad.
Okay, let's go to work.
Vacations with pay.
It's fun when our work is all done to be up at Unity House. Free as the breeze mid the flowers and trees when we're up at Unity House.
We have such fun in the summer, up in the Pocono Hills. Gee, but it's great, oh, you must make a date and we'll find such romance and thrill up at Unity House.
Retirement.
Now don't be tearful, you should be cheerful at last. For your days of toil and worry are past. So long, dear Jenny. So long.
My name is Mary
As Vice President Gingold closed the door on the saga of Mary Brown, the story of a typical garment worker and her conversion from a hesitant member of the ILG to one of its outstanding organizers, the Assembly hailed the members of the cast and the chorus. The entire production, writing, rehearsals, scenic design, pantomime, readings, all had been done by ILGWU members and staff of the Northeast Department. The delegates joined with Gingold in applauding the cast, composer Mike Johnson, artist Bernie Seaman, the chorus, which raised its voice again to sing the song hummed by Alexander Brody and With These Hands.
Union is again.
A present to the president, a musical cigar box. The work of the union never stops, even in Atlantic City. Delegates interrupted their Jubilee celebration to picket a non-union shop in that city. It was a most unusual picket line. The placard carriers that rainy morning included some of the union's most experienced picketers from all parts of the country. In the line were local managers, business agents, organizers from California and Connecticut, and a large number of students from the ILGWU Training Institute. Interns in the cause of unionism, demonstrating their readiness to learn from the old-timers. The ILGWU paused to pay respect to the memory of its past presidents. The hall was decorated with portraits of Benjamin Schlesinger, James Macaulay, Herman Grossman, Charles Jacobson, Abraham Rosenberg, Morris Sigmund, the vacant chair of Vice President Max Cohn, deceased on convention eve, the union's latest martyr, William Lurie. The close ties between the garment workers and AFL founder Samuel Gompers was pictured by the Federation's Vice President Matthew Wall. The students of the Training Institute learned of America's rich labor heritage from those who helped shape it. Vice President Wall was greeted by Sadie Gompers, a niece of Samuel Gompers, and a delegate. That night, the delegates were entertained by a special performance of Madame Butterfly. In introducing William Green, President Dubinsky congratulated him on the 25th anniversary as president of the American Federation of Labor, reminded him of his first garment convention talk in 1925. The AFL chief traced the development of labor's role in international affairs, warned of the dangers of dictators abroad and of reaction at home. In turn, he reminded the garment workers of their empty treasury a quarter of a century ago and congratulated them for the constructive use of their power today. It was with the expressed hope that all labor would soon be united that President Dubinsky awarded the convention badge to President Green. Chicago's Bishop Bernard Shield was welcomed as an old friend. He called upon America's workers to endeavor without the repressive interference of government to preserve and develop the system of collective bargaining to its highest possible degree. On the 8th day of the convention, the delegates were stirred by the bitter and heated debate on communism. Old-timers recalled the damage done by those devoted to dictators, told of the terrible days of 1926 when a ruinous communist-led strike came close to destroying the ILGWU. Full freedom of discussion prevailed. Even the proponents of totalitarianism enjoyed the freedoms they were ready to betray. The convention hall became a huge forum. The worldwide struggle between freedom and dictatorship was spelled out in terms of the ILGWU. President Dubinsky challenged the handful of communists who had maneuvered their way into the convention to come forth and to use its privileges. With characteristic disregard of the truth, their spokesman pleaded innocence, cried that they were being denied the right to speak. The ILGWU chief turned the full wrath of the convention on this small group that had refused to abide by the union rules, that had time and again revealed their primary devotion to a subversive political cause. The convention acted decisively and democratically. Vice President Levy considered his task accomplished. In the evening, the traditional convention banquet was held in the same hall where only a few hours earlier the debate had raged. It was a festive occasion. Old-timers and ILGWU youngsters dancing together in celebration of their union. The final day of the convention began with the presentation of a portrait of President Dubinsky by New York's blouse makers, undergarment workers, and children's dressmakers. With great effectiveness, the painter had caught on canvas the features and spirit of the ILGWU president. Artist Quisgard took a bow for his work. Vice Presidents Greenberg, Kreindler, and Stolberg were thanked by the president. Mrs. Dubinsky and grandchild Reiner came to the platform as Vice President Nagler placed President Dubinsky's name in nomination for re-election. The pent-up enthusiasm of a convention that had worked hard at its task broke loose. On the convention floor, state and regional delegations paraded in the aisles. As the last hour of the convention ticked off, the halls rang with shouts of admiration for the man who, in the years of his leadership, had raised the ILGWU to a position of power and respect throughout the land. Slowly, with difficulty, the convention was brought to order. Secretary Umhay called for the vote. First Vice President Antonini returned the presidential gavel. David Dubinsky, whose career as a unionist had begun with exile to Tsarist Siberia, had been returned to the helm of one of America's greatest unions. As he rose to thank the delegates for the honor bestowed on him, President Dubinsky forgot his own warnings that there were to be no tears at the convention. The devotion and faith of the members touched him deeply. Vice President Hockman nominated Luigi Antonini for re-election as first vice president. The convention approved. President Dubinsky congratulated him. A kiss from Mrs. Antonini made it official. Executive Secretary Frederick Umhay was elected to his important post. The entire General Executive Board of the ILGWU rose to take the oath of office. The traditional ceremony was guided by Judge Jacob Pankin, who in the days of his youth had served the fledgling union as friend and counselor. The new board was declared in office. Thus, the ILGWU began its second half-century. In 10 days, the delegates had hammered out the union's program for the next 3 years. They had devoted their best efforts, the benefits of their wide experience, to discerning the problems that lay ahead. In the last minutes of the historic convention, they sang God Bless America, each delegate remembering the place called home. They sang of that America in which the world's most precious freedoms were strongly anchored, the America to which a world largely deprived of free labor organizations looked with desperate hope. And so ended the Golden Jubilee Convention of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union.